Hi, I am Alfonso Muchacho, and I am not a YouTuber. I am a music producer slash DJ slash part-time mastering kind of guy, but I've got a video camera, so I'm talking to you here now. And the thing I want to talk to you about today is one of the things that people struggle with the most, I think. Certainly I see this from a mastering point of view, where they get the kick all wrong, and they get the balance of the kick wrong, they get the balance of the kick in relationship to the bass line kind of wrong. The kick's either too loud, too quiet, too long, too short, etc., etc. So I'm going to explain what I do, what I try to keep in mind when I'm producing to make sure that my kicks don't spoil an otherwise decent record. So here is a kick that I use quite regularly. Doesn't sound anything too special. Now, let's have a look at what it actually looks like in waveform. So the first thing you will notice is, when I make it bigger, how short it is. So the kick, it doesn't last any time at all. That's the entirety of the kick, which gives all of this space here for other things, like the bass line. And the one thing that it doesn't do is it doesn't bleed into the next kick. It's not so boomy that it's kind of repeating over itself. It's very short, but it sounds punchy. You don't feel like you're losing anything, but all the information's here, giving space for everything else. Now, one of the problems that we go through, and we get this a lot with presets. So when you're going through presets in a synth, they're really good for giving inspiration and new ideas, but they're always drenched in reverb. We've got delay on them. They sound as big as possible. And the reason for that is so that you will buy the synth or the preset pack and you want them to sound as big as possible. But the first thing you should do when you're cycling through presets is take off all the effects, because they're too big. And those sounds, they'll inevitably never fit in a record. And if they do fit in a record, it'll be the only sound you can use in that space because they're so huge. You have the same problem with kicks. So when you're buying a sample pack and you go through the kicks, they all sound great because they all sound huge. No one wants to buy a sample pack full of small, short, dry kicks. And I'm not picking on anyone at all here, but this is one of the kicks from a sample pack that I've got. And you can see how long that is compared to my kick that I'm using here. It's almost reaching the end here. Yeah, almost bleeding through into the next kick. And it sounds great. Sounds absolutely huge, but you're going to have to do so much work to get rid of the tail on that. So what I would do immediately is I would cut it to about halfway, and I would probably roll off the end, something like that. Then I'm going to have to use a lot of EQ to get rid of a lot of that body, the top end, the boominess. It probably is quite subby. Let's have a look. Yeah, enormous. All this information down here. You're going to have to cut all that off. And I have another example here. Look at this one. Look at this one. This one is almost as long as 3 kicks. That's outrageous. There is no record in the world where you're going to be able to just fit that in as it is. Like, it's absolutely obnoxious. And this isn't from like a hip hop pack or a trap pack where the kicks are supposed to dominate the record. This is literally from a techno pack. Absolutely unbelievable. You could never use that in a track without, I mean, you're going to need to take off all of the tail. I don't know if you could ever make that one work. Even then. Even then, it sounds too boomy. And you'll hear that in a nightclub. If you're standing near the wall, it'll sound like there's an extra bass line. You'll hear the kick, and then you'll hear this woo afterwards when the sub comes in. And a lot of the time, the way that kicks work is they start with the information up here is usually quite high up in the spectrum, and then it comes down. So it's like a doo, doo. And all of this information down here is all sub and noise. So the kick will sound like it go woo 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 woo, and you'll hear the reverberation in the nightclub itself, and then the speakers kind of working kind of like twice, because they haven't got time to just finish with the click, they've also got to push out all the sub underneath it. And depending on where you're stood and whether there's a lot of bass lines coming and clashing as well, like it can sound like a real mess. And you hear this a lot, especially in clubs with good systems. It tends to show it up worse. So I can never use that. So what a lot of people do is they use 808 kicks. And I understand this is stylistic. This is something that people use in hip hop a lot, but people use it in the type of music that I make a lot because it's a classic sound. Now, here is an 808 kick. Let's record it and see how long it is. So this one might be, it's not quite as bad as the other one. But look at all that tail. So this here is what is playing when your second kick comes in. If I could have if I knew how to work live. Now you're not going to be able to hear that on a smartphone, but you will in a nightclub. All that information down there. Not good. So again, with an 808, you're going to have to do a lot of work to make it work. And you're going to have to do a lot of EQing and a lot of cutting like this. Still sounds really boomy. So that's the first thing you want to do. Shorter kicks means a tidier track, less problems with the low end, more punch in your bass line, and just more room for the track to breathe. All this room here. I've got space to fill. So the second mistake that I see people make a lot with their kicks is kind of related a little bit to the first mistake in that they want it to sound good on its own. Now here is a kick that I've got from a sample pack. Have a listen. Sounds pretty good, sounds a bit boomy, but let's take a look at what's going on in the kick itself. Now that's almost an entire song there. It's got so much information going on above where you'd expect the kick to be. Look at all that. Look at all that. So what that means is that, I mean, the kick sounds great, but when you put it into a mix and when you put it into a track where you've got percussion playing, such as this, you've essentially got two hi-hats playing at once. So I've got a hi-hat here playing on the downbeat that I put in there on purpose, but I've also got this here. Now, if we're being honest, I would say that in this sample pack, they've essentially sampled a kick drum from another song. I don't think they've made this. I think they've taken it from a song. It's got quite a lot going on in it. It's got this kind of woody sound in the transient. It might be the kick, it might be something extra. And there's at least one hi-hat, I think, playing. It cuts off a little bit. I think it's just a little bit delayed from the first transient of the kick. It could almost be a snare, a very quiet one. But there's certainly percussion playing on top of a kick. That's not just a kick that's been generated. That's the sound of a kick drum and something else, probably a hi-hat, filtered a little bit, compressed a little bit, and then stuck into a sample pack. So it sounds great. You'd go through the sample pack and think, that sounds like a fat kick, that sounds great. But then it's going to clash with anything that you put on top of it. So what I would do is I would filter that kick, probably. So I'd go all the way down here, probably a little bit more. You're still getting all of that information where the kick should be, but none of this information down here. Immediately you can hear the difference. Obviously, it's a bit of a crap loop that I've made here. I've just knocked it up in about 30 seconds, but listen to the difference with and without that filter on the kick. So the reason why you'd want to do this is because Well, these have been put here deliberately. These downbeats that I've put in, I meant to put them there. I didn't put a hi-hat on this kick. That's what I want the kick to sound like. And I'd probably go in a little bit further and EQ it and EQ out some of the body. But it's similar to the presets for synths problem, whereby they want it to sound good so that you'll buy it. Now, no one's going to go into a sample pack and hear a kick that's like this. I think, yeah, that's a once-in-a-lifetime kick. It sounds very dry, almost muffled. It just sounds boring. But boring is kind of what you want when you're building percussion onto the top of it. So you can't fall into the trap of going through samples and getting the biggest sound possible, because you're going to have to make compromises further on. And I think it's very important to have a click sound, maybe a closed hi-hat such as this, on top of a kick, just so that when you're listening through really terrible speakers, like let's say you're listening on a laptop or on your phone, you've still got a bit of a transient to cut through when you can't hear the real thump of the kick. So I think it's important to have a clicky sound on top of the kick, just to make sure it will cut through on terrible speakers. However, I don't think you want to go for a kick where it's clearly been sampled from another record, and there's a high end on that kick that you didn't put there deliberately. I put this kick here, or this click here, deliberately, and you're going to stack more things than just that. That's not a hi-hat loop. I would build more and more and more onto it. And the problem you're going to get is you might run into phasing issues, and you're going to run into the issue where that hi-hat's just not there deliberately. You came looking for a kick, so choose a kick. Don't choose a kick with a hi-hat on top. And you see that with a lot of sample packs. They'll include some extra stuff. You want to be careful when you're choosing your kick, especially from sample pack, that you're not getting other information in the tail of the kick that wasn't necessarily meant to be there, because that kick hasn't been synthesized, it's been sampled from a track. So those are the two things that I noticed that a lot of people get wrong in the techno, progressive house genre when they're choosing their kicks. They listen to them kind of on their own and then shove them into a track and don't take out enough of the information. You want to have a shorter, snappier, punchier kick, and then all of that top end, that can come out. Let the top end be for the hats and percussion that you put in deliberately.